All right. So today we have Dr. Aria Wang here to give a talk on some of her dissertation work. And she was in the lab of Dr. Mike Tarr and Dr. Layla Webby, and just completed her dissertation defense. So big congrats. And so I guess just a little bit of a background on how I came across Aria's work is, for the mind-eye reconstruction projects, we eventually landed on clip space as being a super informative space to map brain responses to for the goal of creating reconstructions or decoding models. And some of the first work that I was coming across where that showed the potential of mapping the brain to clip space was Aria's work. So we're very privileged that she's able to give a presentation on some of that work today. And yeah, you can take it away.
Cool. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, so I think today, I don't have this in slide because I didn't know the kind of audience or motivation, but generally what I'm going to talking about today is more like a scientific understanding of what CLIP can tell us about the brain and how it's kind of different than other model. And if it is like kind of the state of art in terms of brain mapping, like where it is actually better at, it's not, I mean, as we generally like understand it, like the better the model is, the better the brain mapping it is, like it can do. But like, is CLIP even like special? Yeah, I think that's the question that I'm trying to answer here. Yeah. So I think we don't really need that much of a background since you guys already are using CLIP, but generally like we have, as in the field, we have used extensively like a lot of vision-based neural network model and language model in terms of like predicting brain response to like either natural images, movies, or kind of like stories. And they all work kind of well, pretty well in terms of like, in terms of neural network serving as proxy models for brain response. And generally, I think the motivation of this project really comes from, like in my mind, when we look at an image, like the semantic meaning of the image, it's pretty like easily available in our head. In this case, like look at this picture, ImageNet might tell you that, oh, there's a book or a TV, but this caption has much more semantic understanding. For example, a person is eating with chopsticks and reading books in their living room. So it basically just contains much more content, while having limitation, and language, a lot of times are treated as ground truth for like a wide range of computational tasks, and especially like the ones that involve semantic meaning. So we hypothesized that a neural network proxy model for human vision with natural language as feedback, it will be, a better model for high-level visual cortex. So that's why we use CLIP. And in this case, we actually also tested other multimodal model too, like including like all of the ones that kind of people use for like VQA. But we think, I guess we don't really need to introduce CLIP here, but generally, I think the special thing about CLIP that's different than other multimodal, in my opinion, is that they train text encoder and image encoder from scratch, rather than a lot of multimodal model. They kind of just like take like off-the-shelf ImageNet image encoder and then kind of just have like a attention layer that just fuse the two modality at the end. So in that sense, the feedback from like the other modality doesn't really get that prop all the way to the earlier layer in each of this modality. So in case you don't know how CLIP works, basically, yeah, they put the two encoder given a pair of image and image caption, and then they force the latent space to be as similar as possible. And so that they can, like, given a pair of image and image caption, they can pick out the right caption or pick out the right image, depending on, what your question is. And in this case, we use voxelized encoding model. I'm not sure whether this also needs introduction, but generally, this is just a good pipeline to test out your hypotheses. So in this case, we have the activity space, which is from our data, and then input space, the image. And then we featureize the input space, the image using our nonlinear feature mapping, which is our hypothesis. So if we use a CLIP image structure, then that is like our hypothesis, basically about what information in the image that we actually care about. And then it could be a dog detector, it could be an edge detector, but yeah, in this case, we use the clip model. And then eventually we train a linear mapping from feature space to activity space. And this usually we use ridge regression just because it's easy and fast and interpretable. We have used other stuff too, but I don't think this matters that much. But generally, we just want to see like what in the representational space is like linearly readable, like that can be directly mapped into the brain. Yeah, feel free to interrupt. And in this case, we measure the model performance with both correlation and R-square. And the model performance are completely kind of measured on the completely held out data set. So in this case, for static images, we just separate all the images into training, validation, and testing. And we never touch the test set. And validation is used to kind of optimize for hyperparameter in the ridge model. And in this specific project, we use NSD. I think you guys should be familiar with. It's kind of the largest fMRI data set right now, has 8 participants. And the start of this work, so I have early access to this data set. So this work kind of includes all the data NSD has, like including the ones that's held out for like Algonauts. So I don't know whether that's important for reproducibility, but I don't think it matters. And you probably don't need all the images to train this mapping either. And then next, I'm going to show you how I'm going to visualize the result. You guys might be familiar with this as well, but basically this is the PyCortex interface. This is the back of the brain. This is the 3D version of the brain. And you're looking at like kind of visual cortex. So this interface helps us basically inflate the brain, and then now we can make cuts in the brain and then inflate them. So you can imagine it as like you have a ball of newspaper. Now you kind of inflate this ball and then you flatten it. So all the 3D result can be just visualized easily on this 2D space. You're not missing like any voxel that are in the cortical space. And you don't have to like rotate, be like, oh, let me show you the left view, right view. Everything is just one figure. And here, I also, we hand drawn each RIs, for example, early visual, like which is usually here, OPA, EBA. Yeah, we can go into RIs later if you're not familiar with them, but this will be basically how I represent the results. So what we do here is we fit basically both clip image encoder representation, and given the caption of the image, since NSD image lies in COCO dataset, we have this caption available. So we can also see just basically how the semantic representation, like semantic meanings of the image, and through like a clip text encoder, and how they are able to be mapped onto the brain. So these are the 2 things that we wanted to test. Any question at this point?
So I guess is the main goal to be able to create this like brain data one-to-one with the original brain, or is there more of like a theoretical bend to this?
Sorry, what do you mean?
Like, is the goal that you're creating a model that's able to reconstruct the brain responses given the image or given the text? Or like, and clips just seems to be the best, like one great way to do that? Or are you trying to delve into theoretical questions as a result of having such a model?
Yeah, our main goal is the second one. Although at this point, I am also aware that like clip is a lot of people's go-to model in terms of either brain response reconstruction or or brain decoding, like in terms of semantic image. But in this case, we're providing like, yeah, the second perspective, which is that scientifically, what can clip tell us about the brain, and is this actually a better model, or just because it's the new model, on the street, so we are all using it.
So it's kind of like, if it does produce a better model, the question is sort of like, why does it create a better model?
Yeah, a little bit like we try to answer why, although we don't know whether we actually fully answer that question. We do aim to show that it is the better model, and by providing a lot of like control experiments.
And then if you have a model like that, then there are like, I assume, like various follow-up research questions that you can explore from that.
Right. Yeah, we do have like kind of a underlying like you can call it application or like kind of a second like following up paper about this. So another person in my lab is kind of doing brain decoding, but I guess in a more scientific manner, in the sense that we can question specific voxels or regions in the brain, like what they're encoding using this whole like clip encoding decoding pipeline. Although here I'm only talking about encoding result. I mean, if you're interested, I can point you to the paper, but generally, like with this kind of encoding model, you can also do a fair bit of decoding. I don't have it specifically in my slide, but basically in the PyCortex, or maybe I can talk about it later in the result, but basically in the PyCortex interface, what we can achieve is that like we just click on a voxel and we know like what kind of a caption, for example, activates it most, something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So next I'm going to show you some like encoding model results. So this is from the clip image encoder. Given an image, I extract the representation in the clip model, and then this is R square it can predict in the brain. So this actually maxed out to about like 80% of R square. So this is already considered like really, really high among FMI, although NSD do have a really good, like it is a really good data set. So if we normalize this by noise filling, you can actually see it predicts up to about like 90%. So here is the voxel scatter plot where the red line would mean that the voxel lies exactly at noise ceiling. So in this case, the encoding model with clip does go almost over like 85% noise ceiling and really close to the true noise ceiling. And this is how text encoder does. So just to be clear, like this text encoder didn't see a single image, and it only sees the caption of the image that were presented to the subject. And it is still able to predict like the visual cortex fairly well, especially the ROIs that are encoding semantic content. And so basically to see whether this model actually is doing better than like other like single modality model versus, okay, maybe we'll just have a good data set. We did compare them to ImageNet based ResNet and a BERT model. So in this case, we will control for architecture. In this case, I will use a clip ResNet to compare with the ImageNet ResNet, and a BERT, which is transformer, to compare with a text encoder that's also transformer based. Oh, and then here just like another word about method. So in order to actually gain a fair comparison, we don't just compare the model performance. We do actually calculate the unique variance each model is able to account. In this case, like I earlier presented R square. So in order to get a unique variance, we basically concatenate the two model and get the joint variance that's able to explain by both model, and then subtract, for example, like variance explained by model B. So we get the unique variants that are explained by model A or B. So in this case, we can look at like how the visual models compare. So in this case, the pink voxels here are have more unique variants explained by clip, while the blue voxels are more uniquely explained by ImageNet. So in this case, I'm comparing the last layers of two networks. So so losing out like early visual like performance is not like crucial, because actually I can show you layer wise result where if you use earlier layers of clip, it can also explain early visual response in the brain fairly well as well. But basically we see that like yeah, for all the high level vision areas, ResNet clip is doing better, and this is also very consistent across subjects. And this is the layer wise result that I was talking about. So if you actually kind of a color a voxel by which layer in the clip predicts the best, can predict this part of the brain best, you do see this kind of progression from like, which is the darkest blue, which is the earliest layer of clip, to like kind of middle high layer of clip. Yeah, this is kind of saying like, you know, if you see like clip losing performance in the early visual, it's just because you're using the wrong layer. Like, I think because of the semantic mapping is losing, like, for example, topographic information that's earlier layers kind of encoding for. Yeah, and then we also verify this kind of a absence of clip with scatter plot. So this is just one model performance plot and unique variance plot. So in both cases, we're plotting ResNet-based clip and ResNet-based ImageNet, and the red line just means they're, you know, doing equally well. So in this case, you can see like kind of majority, especially the best performing voxel, clip does explain a lot more unique variance and has much better performances.
Model performance is R squared
Yeah.
divided by noise ceiling, or just R squared?
This is just R square. This is raw R square. Yeah, so and then we see that like in most of the ROIs that we're interested in, like in this case, the place ROIs, body ROIs, FFA, TPOJ, which is the areas that usually people think is related to theory of mind, and as well as language areas. So CLIP has much better like kind of dominating unit variance explained. So it's just kind of like a validation of what we found in the flat map. Yeah, and then also in language, we also compare the two language models. So in this case, CLIP just does overwhelmingly well. So here, blue voxels means CLIP is explaining much more unit variance. So basically, in this case, I think the interpretation is that CLIP is much better than a language model, and it's not just a language model. And it also is kind of saying that CLIP, like as a model, CLIP does map kind of a lot of the visual information to the last layer, to the sense that just giving the text or the caption of the image, it can like basically perform like as well as like a vision model. And then yeah, that's also fairly like very consistent across subjects. So next, I guess I'm gonna go into a little bit about kind of into analysis about why we think CLIP is a better model. So one guess is because it's kind of a encoding of a semantic content. In this case, like take this 3 image from the COCO data set, they're like actual image assist. So, and then I have attached the captions under the image as well. So for example, the first image, the caption is the person is holding a hot dog wrapped in napkin. The second one, a person with 2 Nintendo Wii controller in their hands. The third image is captioned, a girl plays Wii in a living room while 2 people watch. So in this case, if you give this 3 image to ImageNet, they might be like, okay, hands, they're the kind of the prominent objects in this image. However, if you kind of want to group the image based on their caption space, the semantic space among their captions, then the second and the third image both have Wii or some form of a controller in the caption. So in this sense, if you are training, a vision model with the caption, then the model will group the second and third image together. So this is just, yeah. So this will be what we hypothesize ImageNet will group, and this will be what kind of a CLIP space will do. And then we sort of measure this through the kind of a correlation of the 2 image representation, and then using basically like to output basically this like a similarity, kind of pairwise similarity metric of how close a pair of image exists in both model space. So they're very correlated, first of all. So we are interested in like kind of the corners. So in this case, in the corner where pictures are seen most similar in CLIP and dissimilar in ImageNet, we've kind of found pairs of image that are have pairs of animals in it, and pairs of people who are surfing and skateboarding. And on the other hand, we see pairs of picture with people, like for example, both wearing suits. However, they're in like very different contexts. Like for example, like this one, obviously this first person is giving a talk, the second person is like just in an ad. So this kind of confirms our hypothesis, although I don't think this is like a conclusive kind of a statement about why CLIP is doing better. So another way that we're trying to understand this model better is by doing SVD of the learn model, or PCA. They're like, I guess the same thing here. So what we do is we run PCA through this linear mapping W, and then we basically decompose that into a USB matrix, and then this V matrix has the principal component that we can interpret. So since everything in CLIP is done through dot product, I mean in terms of loss layer, one thing we can really easily do to interpret this model is by literally just like sample 10,000 random images or caption, and then take their representation and then compute a dot product between this PC and like all the image embeddings. And in this case, we can rank all the image, and and then tell how basically closely aligned they are with each PC. So, for each PC, you can kind of group all the image with lowest score and with highest score on both sides to interpret like this model. So what we found is, for example, PC1 find this like kind of a more traditionally like found dimension, which is inanimate versus animate. So on the left side, you see inanimate place scenes. On the right side, you see animate people scenes. So in the interest of time, I can show you all the PC, but here I'm gonna skip through some of them, and for example, show you like some other interesting ones. This is not cherry pick at all. This is just literally copying the first 9 images that came out from the analysis. And then in this case, we found crowd versus individual. So this is also, in my opinion, quite interesting because both of them have people in it. So if, let's say, if you just put this image through a category model, it's very likely that both group of image will come out as like, okay, person or man. However, in this case, the clip can pick out like crowds versus individual doing sports. So in our mind, this sort of dimension can emerge because we're able to use a model that takes kind of natural language feedback. If both group of people are labeled man, then the fine-grained kind of semantic dimension would not be captured in this network representation to begin with. So it would not be able to, you'll not be able to use this to capture such dimension in the brain as well. So every dimension we found in the PC has a corresponding like voxel projection in the brain. So that's what we're gonna show later. So here, so first image, which is what I shown before, voxels that are best explained by clip after the univariance analysis. And on the right side is what voxel projection look like when we project the voxel back to the first PC. So the yellow voxel here lies on like a negative side of the PC, and then the green voxel lies on the positive side of the PC. The direction doesn't really matter. It's just kind of a two side of the PC. But what we can find here is that the voxel that are really uniquely explained by clip really overlaps almost exactly with this kind of a yellow side, which is the kind of the voxel that are negatively projected onto the first PC. And we can also verify, basically it's like this group of voxel. We can verify that it does have a really like correlated relationship. And now we can like look at this kind of voxel again. And most of them are in EBA and FFA. So they are like the body regions and face region. And we can look at this region with the image again. So this is the inanimate dimension that I mentioned earlier. And we can even verify what are the category distribution of this two group of image, like with the COCO categories. And indeed, like the left or the negative side of the image has more people, animals, and sports. So in this case, it's also kind of indicating that region that benefit most from clip embedding, they do encode scenes of human interacting with their environment. So in that, we think is where clip has the most power. Basically, with the captions, we're able to provide like much fine-grained details about like, okay, what this person is doing. So that's usually not sufficiently described with just categories or other kinds of like non-language feedback. Any questions at this point? So what we can do with this is that, we have all these PC and we can actually dissect the brain with this analysis. So first PC separates out, for example, now in this image, I just separated the yellow voxel and the green voxel in like two figure. So you see EBA FFA on the right, and then on the left is like kind of everything else that's related to kind of inanimate features, images. And then we can actually keep dissecting the brain with just like each PC. And so if we also put PC2 after PC1, we'll see actually place regions emerge, like RSC, OPA, PPA here. And then the foot region. So we have a separate paper kind of identify like a foot region in the brain through NSD data. And then we actually run follow-up localizers to identify there are indeed like there's a foot ROI in the brain. So here with this method, we can just recover this foot region pretty easily. And this green map almost corresponds exactly with like what localizer were Intel. And you can actually do much more complicated things. For example, the PC5, where you identify crowd versus a person, you can like there's a brain map corresponding to it too. But this actually gets into really like fine grained like anatomy stuff. So in the interest of time, I'm not gonna like go into this part. But generally the takeaway is that with this method and this like model that's semantically very rich, we can actually do a lot in terms of like pinpointing what kind of semantic information we encode in the brain. So you might ask, you might ask, there are a lot of differences between the ImageNet based ResNet and a clip based ResNet. What we're interested in is like, okay, including language, does it help? Okay, it does help, but we control for latent feature dimension and architecture. However, they're also trained on very different data set. I mentioned category label has this kind of a limitation there, but the image itself is different, right? And it also comes from a very different distribution, which means it will have a different diversity. So in this case, because of the the era of open clip, we have a lot more kind of clip model that's available to use. So in this case, we'll compare to YFCC clip and also other models that includes different type of feedback, as well as a Lion clip. So they are trained on kind of like a much bigger data set and also like a different distribution of data. So with this many clip model, we're able to actually control for data set diversity, data set size, and feedback, like basically each variable at a time to ask the question whether language feedback is actually giving you anything unique when you control for everything else. So on the left here, I'm showing a self-supervised learning model versus a self-supervised learning model with language feedback. So in this case, it's still univariance analysis, and I'm showing you kind of 4 subjects in their visual cortex region. And the blue voxels here are basically the voxels that has much more unique variance explained because of the addition of language feedback with everything else control. And in this case, as I said before, like the early visual area, we're not really concerning because we're using the last layer of the network. So we're more concerned about like kind of, can we get better prediction in higher level visual cortex? So in this case, we actually, we only get more unique variance explains in the EVA region that I talked about before. And and visually, this is still the areas that where clip has the most leverage from the previous analysis. And outside of this, we also see that data set actually doesn't really matter that much. Maybe after it's reached a ceiling, adding more data, it just like not kind of give you better prediction. So 400 million Lion, 2 billion Lion actually doesn't really differ that much in terms of predicting the brain. And the other thing we found is that data set diversity definitely matters. So this is a comparison between OpenAI dataset and Lion clip. So in this case, Lion actually provides slightly better prediction in terms of EBA and like I guess the high level regions that we're concerned about. And in this case, we are not able to kind of include YSCC as like a control study just to compare the effect of diversity, because there's just like YSCC is also smaller, so there is like kind of a 2 element entangled together. But if you're interested, like basically there are a whole different paper about how data robust, like the data diversity kind of drives how robust a clip paper is by Alice Fang and the University of Washington people. But what they found is that in this case, the data diversity really matters in terms of how robust this clip is in like 0-shot benchmark. And in their paper, like YFCC is kind of like a inferior, more inferior data set because it's not as diverse, and generally the clip model train analysis doesn't really generalize as well. This is just like a more specific kind of MNI space map on the specific voxels that are actually uniquely like explained better by adding natural language feedback, if you're kind of more like neural person. Anyway, and then one other words about kind of how like how important it is to use voxel-wise analysis. So this is basically what this analysis would look like if you just average results through ROI. So or the flat map that we see earlier actually doesn't really look that different if you average ROIs. So also NSD has like huge ROIs, like the EBA is just like covering like a lot of voxels. So in this case, like for example, if you just average them, like SSL alone versus SSL plus language in YFCC actually doesn't really looks like they have different performance in the body region. However, you do see this bimodal distribution, which is like what we observe in the voxel-wise map. So yeah, this is just to say that averaging can be bad. If you are looking for like kind of a subregion of voxel that encodes meaningful semantic information, you shouldn't just kind of average across like ROIs or take the average result as like a guideline of like how well your model does. Yeah. Anyway, just to conclude, we look at dataset diversity, and it maybe matters, and dataset size, and it maybe matter, and dataset diversity definitely matters in our perspective. Okay, so this is everything I plan to present. The conclusion is addition of natural language supervision to models that are trained on dataset with certain size and diversity definitely improves prediction in high-level visual cortex, and it helps us to pinpoint very specific neural representations of fine-grained semantics. Yeah, and with that, I'd like to thank my lab and my collaborators. And yeah, I have more stuff if you're interested in, like, depending on what you're interested, I guess. Yeah, cool.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, oh, I should probably keep sharing. Yeah, of course.
Could you share go back to the summary slide, just so, yeah.
Is this the summary slide you want, or the previous slide?
Yeah, and the previous one as well. Okay. Yeah, could you speculate a bit more on how you think, what are the most important factors in that drive these the differences between the ImageNet and the clip trained, like if you had to rank between these different
I see. Yeah, so
yeah.
I actually I didn't include here, but I actually used a data set that people recently made called ImageNet captions. So ImageNet actually, all of image has captions, but it's only like smaller amount of image. But that model, the clip model trained on that, like, sucks. So I think, yeah, in order for the natural language kind of captions to really have useful feedback to the visual network, you kind of have to have enough like different kinds of pictures and enough captions. That's what I think. So
the reason why image caption sucks is that it's not big enough. Is that
I think so. I think it's also really like skill, the distribution. Like, for example, ImageNet has like just so many dogs and like things that we don't really care about. And I think just because it is a curated data set, right? So like you come up with 1,000 category first, and then you look for the pictures correspond to the 1,000 categories. So it's not a natural distribution of what we see every day. And I do think there is this ecological dimension in the brain that, like we care about food a lot, for example, and faces and bodies, and that just because that's what we need to navigate. And ImageNet is not kind of created from the same motivation, right? So I do think like basically covering like what the brain cares about in the data set is important.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I just had a question about in terms of, I guess, using just the cortex. Have there been any papers, or have you done any investigation into, I guess, deeper slices within the cortex? I mean, rather subcortex, rather.
I didn't do anything on like the ganglion. Like, what kind of a representation are you trying to look for? Like, so like PyCortex kind of give you I wouldn't say subcortical, but like different layers of response too. Like you can actually look at like different cortical depth in terms of like voxels on how they predict. But I'm not sure what your hypothesis is, or like what kind of a question you're trying to answer.
I guess, yeah, that would be the thought. How deep are those voxels?
How deep those voxels are, or yeah, I'm not sure. Like we usually don't look at that, although it is available there. If there's a need to look at that, I like we're able to, but yeah, it depends on what you're going after, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'm not very familiar with this general field of using machine learning models to predict cortex, but there was kind of a big like splashing paper a while back by Ryland Schaefer at MIT.
Yeah.
I was just curious what your opinion is on that sort of where like my understanding of their claims is that deep models kind of provide like a high dimensional like basis set that allows you like a rich feature space that allows you to like somehow capture the variance, like map like I think what they're trying to say is that like the computations that a deep network undergoes is not necessarily the same computation as like
Yeah.
the cortex.
Yeah.
So I maybe you're probably much more familiar with this than
Okay.
me.
Yeah,
I'm just
I
curious.
actually, so funny thing. I'm aware of
Yeah.
I'm aware of that paper and the ongoing
If you can
debate
explain
between.
to me what they're really claiming as well, that would be educate me what exactly they're saying.
I actually kind of want to open my job talk slide, but anyway, my point is
Please.
that I'm aware of that debate. So
Yeah.
like there are different levels of like understanding, right? So okay, well, what I'm doing here is extremely simple. I'm mapping from representation to representation. So I'm looking at the solution space. Like, okay, this is not even a mechanism, just like at a snapshot of the brain at different like layers, or different visual areas. Are they even using like similar representation, like in the sense that that's linearly mappable? So I think for that, we can say that, okay, if it predicts well, it uses at least like similar form of solution. And then what he's concerned is about basically like what's the like given the computational goal. So I think his paper is kind of this rebuttal on like the navigational paper by the Surya like Ganguly lab, right? So their idea is much more like kind of a meta in the sense that like, okay, if we train the artificial system with the same computational goal, can we like kind of reduce the same solution just because the goal is the same? Can we just derive the same solution? Like, you know, there are two questions: whether the solution is the only solution an artificial network will learn, and whether it is like the most computational efficient solution. And that explains why the brain learns such thing, right? And then the original paper 2019 was that, okay, this is the Kohlstrom solution given a non-negative constraint. That's therefore why the brain has hexagonal grid cell. And then this Sheffer paper was like, okay, like that's maybe not true. Although, I mean, this ongoing debate is still going on. They're trying to say that, right.
Who's they? That the last lay they you just
Sheffer.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're trying to say that this is like messier than they present it. Like, you know, not necessarily you reduce this form of grid cell, and given then you cannot say that like given the same computational goal, you would like kind of have the same solution. I mean, really it's the maybe I don't remember where I put it, but like I agree. I agree with his like methodology, or he's like thinking about. I think we just need to be careful about like what we are trying to understand here. Like what kind of question you're trying to ask. But yeah, I mean, I think in that sense, yeah. So sorry, I forgot your question.
Oh, well, my question is kind of broadly like what's your take on, like, it's kind of philosophical, like in the sense that what is it that we're detecting when we're mapping representations from a deep network to cortex, right? Like Gaiman's and Co. and Ganguly probably would, their claim, right? My take is that, the you train a neural network on some task, and then uh, the fact that the representations are mappable or linearly translatable means that the agent, the neural network, arrived at some solution that is like similar to the brain, right? And my understanding of what Schaefer said, which I guess you summarized, was that like there might be no algorithm, like there might be no algorithmic similarity in the two solutions, the biological and the artificial. And I was just curious what your take is.
Right.
Like,
yes. So I short answer is I agree, right? This is what I'm showing here is the picture that you're trying to, like, I think address, which is that you can arrive at the same solution, but with completely different computational goals, the loss function here. So, or you can have the same loss function, but brain is stuck in some like local minimum, because evolution is a continuous optimization process. Why would we have the best solution anyway? So that's why I'm more interested in like kind of a closed loop experiment where you can actually like figure out, like, identify a circuit in the animal that does the, like, you think the same task with similar solution, and you can knock out neuron and then see what you kind of like what you destroy. Like through that, like causally whether a neuron is doing certain computation in the brain. And also you can use out of distribution, like behavioral and neural data, to kind of narrow down the model space as well. So this work, I'm also like, I think Surya has like similar work that kind of does that, where they kind of prune the network, and then where a network is kind of reduced down to a very small subcircuit, and then now they're kind of look at whether they can produce new behavioral phenomena with this subcircuit. And then the other way to do it is you kind of, that's kind of like the neural knockout that I was mentioning, where if you kind of mimic a biological circuit in the machine, and then now you can like knock out both at the same time, and then found like one-to-one mapping between these two circuits, and then use this like model now to predict new behavioral data. So I think you do need like behavioral data to be part of the response here, and ideally you will be able to do some kind of manipulation, so you know that you're getting down to like a circuit level understanding. Yeah.
Amazing. Yes, Ben Cowley, yes. He was at CMU. It's also a favorite of ours. Yeah,
also
cool.
what?
Let you present. Paul and I
We're working with Ben right now to do some closed loop real-time fMRI experiments. So.
Yeah. So cool you presenting.
Yeah, I was given a postdoc offer to work with him, but nice. I didn't take it. But yeah, cool. His stuff is exciting. I know about this closed loop fMRI stuff, but I kind of want to move away from fMRI. That's why.
That's like, you just touched on that. That was really interesting to me. Like, what do you think about why are you moving away from? You wanted to learn a new modality, because I was thinking, fMRI especially, like, why would fMRI, a voxel, right, is like, I don't know, 100,000 neurons, something like that. you know, why do, you know, in neural networks, in normal neural networks, do we see like close regional correlations in behavior that would show up in um, you know, if you were, let's say you were trying to predict another ResNet, right? Instead of trying to predict to the brain, you would predict to another ResNet. Would we expect like regional, you know, if we measure like 100,000 neurons that are close together, we expect like them to have some measurable signal, like showing foot, right? Like you're finding regions so interested in foot, right? Like I'm finding it hard to think of any constraint in the training of neural network, of an artificial neural network that would cause like 100,000 regional neurons to collectively code for some feature. So why do you think like we're able to detect like that in fMRI?
Yeah, so the brain does have this feature where, you know, even just voxel level, like close by voxels do have a shared representation. So people
and
try
I know
to induce.
That like DiCarlo are trying, right? They're trying to like model it using topographic networks, but you know, our ResNets, they don't have any of those. They don't have any of those constraints. So how could a ResNet? How do you think ResNet is able to predict those regional correlations in a voxel, for example?
I mean, in our case, if you just do voxel-wise encoding, you doesn't really care about the voxel correlation. In some sense, it's a stricter test, right? Like treating each voxel as an individual model, can you still predict like what the group of voxels is doing, and you still can recover those RI maps. So in that sense, like we don't really care about whether voxel, like whether there's like a regional preferences. So
I meant that a voxel. I meant that a voxel is like an average of many neurons. So given that we are able to predict a voxel, like even if we're able to predict single voxels, that's saying that we can predict multiple the collective activity of 100,000 neurons, right? Okay.
Right. Yeah. I think in that sense, we are relying on the fact that in the brain there is this like spatial dependence, like, or what do you call it, special correlation in terms of what neuron encodes, right? I mean, I'm sure there are more fine-grained like representations among that like hundreds of neurons in a voxel, but or thousands of neurons. But yeah, like those things we're for sure not getting out. But there's still information, like, you know, at a group level. So I think this is different than predicting from a ResNet to a ResNet. Like this will be similar to predicting from a ResNet to a ResNet that has spatial or like interconnectivity constraints.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you detail more about the comparison between self-supervised learning without language supervision and SSL with natural language? As in, like, why do you think the natural language models do better?
Why do I think? I thought that's the whole. That's what my talk was trying to say.
Okay. I don't mean the ImageNet one. I mean,
oh yeah,
like,
I see.
Specifically with SSL without natural language and SSL with language.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just I mean, first of all, it's extra feedback, and it's extra feedback that's very like ecologically relevant. Yeah, I don't think there's like a really good one-line reason that I would give about like why SSL is not doing as well. But SSL in this case is mainly like I guess folks focus on different kinds of information or different kinds of like representation of image, if that makes sense.
And when you're comparing with SSL, like what model did you use or what approach? Like,
This is Sinclair.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess one question, maybe more of a practical question, like when you were showing the flat map of the hierarchy of clip and how the later layers predict better with the higher level functioning. I'm just wondering, like, what would happen if you say concatenate across all of the layers of clip and just have like a giant embedding space that includes the outputs of every single layer and then map with that? Does that do worse?
It will probably do better actually. Yeah. Yeah, I think generally it just does better. Like we also look into like whether layer correspondence like hypothesis is, or like whether people kind of this kind of observation always holds true. And then for that we did things like, for example, like a forward regression kind of like where you have the whole all the layers and then you prune them one by one and see the performance loss, or you add layers one by one and see like the performance gain. And in both cases, I think like definitely with more feature, with more things you're using to predict, like it is doing better. Yeah, we didn't do it with clip specifically, but I think generally that is true. Yeah, but we also observed that in like ResNet model, for example, like we don't really see layer correspondence. Like the middle layer of ResNet is like the best at predicting everything almost. That's something that we also found kind of interesting. Yeah.
So it just happens to do the best without like knowing why it might.
I think just because the network gets really expressive, and therefore, yeah, and therefore like kind of middle layer contains like kind of a lot of different like over a redundancy of information. Like, yeah, that's my interpretation of it. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess
Like,
it's somewhat related to the question of that Alex was kind of looking at that with like, you know, it's one thing to be able to predict using just a model, and it's a totally other thing to like dissect a model and understand. Maybe you're not predicting it as well, but with less features, but you're better understanding why it's predicting well.
Yeah, I think that's the one other direction that I wanted to pursue with my other work. But yeah, my other like one sentence summary was just I was trying to use like a pool of network that's trained to do like different tasks, assuming that like each network should only care about like specific task variants, and then see how different network actually predicts because the task is different. And then trying to draw a conclusion from that. But yeah. I mean, that has limitation too, but generally, yeah, this is just, yeah, one line. Basically, this is a ResNet, this is the AlexNet. So what people see like earlier layer predict earlier layer better, later layer predict later layer better in AlexNet kind of breaks down if you use like a big enough network. The x-axis here are layers.
The embedding size getting bigger?
They're all PCA to the same size.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, the inherent dimension could be different. That is like hard to control, but anyway, yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, thanks for showing that.
Yeah, yeah. This is a workshop paper. Basically, it's trying to say that we don't know what we are using to interpret the brain. Like, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, there's all these there's so many different ways that you can build these encoding models, and it's like it's not necessarily the initial way was just do ridge regression to the best image classification model or whatever, and then see the hierarchy kind of relates to the hierarchy in the brain, and like, what does that mean exactly? And I guess that can tell you something about architectural similarities, like with convolutional neural networks and whatever. But as these more and more complex models come out, like feasibly, there is less of a connection with the brain with transformers, I would guess, than convolutional nets. But
not really. Yeah, transformers works well too.
But like, it'll probably predict as well or better. Like,
yeah.
I guess that's a cool thing you can do with animal models. You can more specifically look at.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Around.
At least in clip sense, like changing from transformer backbone to convolutional backbone doesn't really change much. Really small differences. Yeah. I guess I'm curious, like, what do you guys like find out from your work that is like a what kind of intuition that you gain from your work that you think like people usually don't know about? I guess like what kind of model that you prefer to use, or like what kind of a new question mark that you have that's arising from your work, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we tried mapping to a couple different spaces. Amandeep can also talk more about this, but we were also kind of constrained because we specifically were trying to use a pre-trained diffusion model that can output an image. And so you have these models that have been fine-tuned to be able to accept clip embeddings, but not just any clip embedding, it's specifically the last layer of clip, or in other cases, the last hidden layer of clip. And so the last hidden layer of clip contains a lot more information because it's not just the classification token. And so we found that worked way better just because it contained more information from the model.
Way better than what?
Then mapping to the final layer and using a model that reconstructs based on the final layer output. So mapping to the last layer of clip, or mapping to the last hidden layer of clip.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it worked a lot better to map to the last hidden layer of clip, but we couldn't do other stuff like what you're doing with, mapping to all the different layers, because we were confined to the model, the eventual final model that's already frozen and pre-trained to have a certain input. We also mapped to open clip and found that did better than clip.
I see. And when you say last hidden layer, you mean like the not the 512, but the layer before 512?
Yeah, like 257 by 768 was the last hidden layer, but the classification final layer is just at the 1 by 768.
Oh, right. Okay. But why do you have access to the last hidden layer but not the layer before?
Because we were using like stable diffusion. Other people can fine-tune stable diffusion to be able to accept clip embeddings instead of text. And versatile diffusion is kind of a variant of stable diffusion that was specifically trained on last hidden layer of clip. So we could train our own diffusion model, potentially, like training our own stable diffusion or whatever to be able to handle whatever, but we didn't want to go that far.
Damn, yeah, I could train my own clip too, but am I going to do that? But from my observation, using like the n-1 layer is already much better in terms of predicting early visual. So I think there's still a lot to gain there, but using a layer before is like maybe not worth it. Like I think the jump between n-1 to n is the largest compared to all the previous ones. So I don't think you're losing much.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd also say that an important conclusion from our work was that using all 257 clip tokens like preserve a lot of low level information. So in your work, you showed that like as you go deeper, you get more high level information, but the low level visual cortex information kind of decays, right?
Yeah.
So
especially between n-1 to nth layer.
So I'm wondering if we use all the 257, maybe the decay is just in the CLS token, which is kind of incentivized to have a summary of the entire image. Like it's a high level token.
It is. Yes.
But
yeah.
like the rest of the 256 tokens actually map the, like actually model the low level like patches. So maybe if we do like do this with all 257 tokens, maybe there won't be as much of a decay over time, like over the number of layers.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, am I understanding it correctly? So when you're looking at the hierarchy, are you only taking like the classification token of the second to last layer, or are you taking the full like in our case like 257, 768 kind of hidden state?
For me,
Yeah.
I don't remember the specific dimension, but I think just I mean I have the access to entire model like inner state, so I just take all the units response and then compress this dimensionality. Like yeah. So I think I'm taking the whole thing.
Okay.
Then already using that.
Yeah, I guess the other important thing that we found was that we tried mapping to both clip image space and clip text space. And we found that like mapping to clip image space, which is so much better for feeding that into a reconstruction model, even if we like do a weighted average between how we map to clip text and clip image, like the clip image was so much richer of an embedding space.
Yeah, I'm not surprised either. Yeah. I think the text space is like yeah, it's not quite a language model, and it's definitely like a good model of the semantics, but not like yeah, I don't think it contains that much visual information. Just based on the encoding map, like it loses out early visual too much. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think
but you were saying like the advantage to having language. I mean, I guess the clip image space is trained with language, so it becomes richer due to the text, but maybe like, I don't know, mapping to the text space specifically is not as informative.
I think if your goal is to reconstruct the image, then using text space is definitely not advantageous. But on the bright side, you can use any text to reconstruct an image, right? Like it doesn't have to be you don't have to have access to the image that the person sees. Yeah, we actually we have I don't have like have it here, but you know, earlier I mentioned with this encoding model, we can like click on individual voxels and then see what kind of a caption maximize the activity of individual voxels. I mean, we don't have a good like way to summarize what we see, but there like you will see like, for example, one voxel just like cut, like scissors, like cuts, like things like that. And then you like click on
sorry, voxel cuts. What do you mean?
like you just give them random text, like like 10,000 different text, and then see what this voxel prefers in this like clip-based model. Yeah, and then this voxel just prefers cutting in general, like related stuff. And then nearby voxel same, not too big, and then you move on, and then you know something else. But like there's just like yeah, like weird, I don't know, semantic grouping of voxel that we found that you can actually experiment. So I bet that if you have like some sort of a image generator, you can probably generate like image hypotheses about like what specific voxel cares about, and then test that. So I guess that may be one way to use the text-based encoder. Yeah. Yeah, we don't know how to write up those results because it's just like really weird, and like at the end it would be like, oh, are you cherry picking? You know, so.
I think it's still cool though. Like take some examples of specific voxels and like exploring that.
Yeah, I think so. Like I think if you like, we want to do a whole new experiment on it, yeah, that would be cool.
I guess I had one other comment from your presentation about the dataset size. Like, is my memory correct that the Lion 400 million, it's like a specifically well curated 400 million, and the 2 billion might have duplicates in it and is not as well curated?
That's possible. Yeah, I'm not sure anymore.
Because I'm wondering if that might be why there wasn't a big difference between the two.
Yeah, that's possible. Also, 400 million is already like big enough, I think. Like,
Yeah, it's still a huge amount.
yeah.
Okay, do we have any other questions from anyone?
So I'm somewhat of a newcomer to the space, so I'm sorry if this is kind of a naive question, but I guess as far as like the length of the semantic sentence that you're inputting, at what point do you find that you experience, I guess, the drop off in performance?
At what point? Sorry. Can somebody repeat the question? I didn't.
So I guess let's say like at how many words would you expect to experience like a drop off in performance and describing the image?
Like predicting from caption to the brain, specifically, right? You're asking.
Yeah, like how long
Yeah,
the phrase would be.
That's actually a really good question. So we think you can actually cut a lot and only maintain the main objects in the image and still have a fairly good prediction from the text encoder to the image, which is also what we found intriguing as well. So that what that means is that whether all the things in the caption are equally weighted in the text model, no. And the second thing is why the text encoder is able to predict so well is not because it used everything in the caption, but more like it kind of represent the semantic things in the space that's similar to the brain. Or that's why it's able to predict like fairly well in the visual cortex. So yeah, as what we observe, you can cut actually a lot to have like maybe 2 words to summarize your caption. We actually did that, yeah. So
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for giving us this amazing presentation.
yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Amazing presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.